It's Monday morning. You haven't even walked through the office doors yet, and you are already caught in a high-stakes moment of workplace friction. You're staring at an email where another department just maneuvered to make your team the scapegoat for their delay. They missed their deadline, but right there in the second paragraph they wrote, "Due to pending clarifications from the analytics team, we are unable to proceed." That's you. You stop breathing for a second. You feel the heat rising from your neck to your ears. And then you see the CC line, the CEO, the VP, the department heads. This isn't just a project update. It feels like a public challenge to your professional integrity. You want to hit reply all. You want to pull up the exact timestamps proving you sent them the data last Thursday. You want to prove you are right and they are wrong. But pause. Just sit in that feeling for a second. And now, put the phone down. Because in the logic of the professional world, focusing solely on proving you are right can sometimes be the most expensive distraction from actually protecting what matters to you. Welcome to the 9 to 5 Book Club, a survival guide for the daily grind. Today, we are decoding Liu Run's Underlying Logic, a book about the structural forces beneath the surface of your office, your career, and your decisions. We're going to look at why some people navigate obstacles with apparent ease, why your hardest work might be leading you nowhere if you're missing one key ingredient, and how the language around you, and inside your own head, can quietly shape the choices you make. This isn't about tricks. It's about understanding the system well enough to move through it with purpose. Let's go back to that reply all email. Why is hitting send, even with proof, not always the smartest move? Liu Run explains that whenever a conflict happens, we tend to view it through one of three lenses. Each one is useful. Each one has limits. The first is the jurist's view. Who broke the rules? This is where most of us go instinctively. We think about evidence, facts, and truth. If someone misrepresents the facts, the jurist says they are wrong and you are right. This feels satisfying because it validates our sense of integrity. And in the right forum, an HR process, a legal dispute, it matters enormously. The second is the economist's view. Who could have prevented this at the lowest systemic cost? The economist looks at process. Maybe the communication protocol between teams is flawed. They want to fix the root cause. This lens is valuable for building better systems, but most individual contributors aren't in a position to redesign how their whole organization operates overnight. That's where the third perspective enters, the merchant's view. The merchant asks a different question. Who suffers the most if this doesn't get resolved? And therefore, who has the most incentive to solve it? This sounds counterintuitive. You might think, why should I fix a problem someone else caused? But the merchant isn't asking about fault. They're asking about incentives. Here's a useful way to think about it. Imagine you're crossing the street on a green light. You have every legal right to be there. But a truck is running the red. Do you step out just because you are legally correct? If that truck hits you, the driver is in the wrong. But you are the one in the hospital. The driver loses a license. You lose your health. So in the logic of self-protection, setting aside who is right, it makes sense to let the truck pass first. Liu Run uses this kind of reasoning to make a specific point. In professional life, waiting for someone else to fix a problem that's hurting you is a passive strategy. When you are the one absorbing the cost of a conflict, you also have the clearest incentive to resolve it. Not because you are to blame, but because you have the most to gain from moving forward. This isn't a universal rule that applies to every situation. It's a useful lens for a specific category of problem. The kind where assigning fault correctly won't actually change your outcome. The jurist, the economist, and the merchant each illuminate something real. The skill is knowing which lens to pick up when. Once you shift from who's right to what do I do next, you start noticing something else. How the language around you quietly frames your options before you've even started thinking. Liu Run describes a fundamental pattern in how our minds process questions. When we hear the word why attached to a statement, our brains tend to skip the step of evaluating whether the statement is even true. Instead, we immediately go into search mode, hunting for a reason. Imagine a colleague leans over and says, "Hey, why has the boss been so critical of your reports lately?" In that split second, most people don't think, "Wait, is the boss actually being critical? My last 3 reports were approved without comment." Instead, the why acts as a kind of premise delivery mechanism. Your brain starts racing. Is it because I was late on Tuesday? Did someone say something? You spend the afternoon anxious and defensive over a fact that may not even exist. You see this in meetings too. A manager asks, "Why are we struggling to keep up with the competition?" Suddenly, the room is generating reasons for struggling, rather than questioning whether the data actually shows they're struggling at all, or whether they're quietly winning in a different segment. This isn't a conspiracy. Most people who ask loaded why questions aren't being deliberately manipulative. But the effect is real, and it's worth being aware of. The practical skill here is learning to pause and separate the question from the premise embedded in it. Before you start answering why, ask yourself, is the thing being assumed here actually true? The more persistent version of this pattern, though, is the one we run on ourselves. Think about the questions you ask internally when you're burnt out or frustrated. Why am I the only one doing the real work around here? Or, why does this system always reward the loud people over the productive ones? These questions feel like honest self-reflection. But notice what they do. They instruct your brain to find evidence for a conclusion you've already reached. Ask yourself why you're unlucky, and your mind will surface every piece of data that confirms the answer. The framing itself shapes what you see. Liu Run's point isn't that systemic problems don't exist, they often do. His point is that, why is the system like this, is a question that can consume enormous mental energy while producing very little forward movement. The more generative question is usually, how? How are the people who seem to navigate this well actually doing it? What are they solving that I'm not? Who are they building relationships with? The moment you shift from why to how, you move from analysis of a problem to engagement with a solution. There's a famous story Liu Run draws on that illustrates one of the most common errors in how we learn from success. And it has a name: survivorship bias. During World War II, Allied forces examined returning bomber planes and mapped out where the bullet holes clustered. Most damage was on the wings and the tail. The instinct was to reinforce those areas. That's where the planes were getting hit. But statistician Abraham Wald pointed out a flaw in the reasoning. The planes they were examining were the ones that made it back. The bullet holes on the wings showed where a plane could be hit and still fly. The planes that were hit in the engine or the cockpit didn't return. They never came back. They were never counted. They were simply gone. And nobody thought to ask why. Wald's insight was brutal in its simplicity. Stop reinforcing where the bullets are. Reinforce where they aren't. Because the absence of damage isn't safety. It's where the fatal hits were landing all along. In careers, we fall into the same trap constantly. We look at successful people and study their visible habits, the morning routines, the reading lists, the frameworks they talk about publicly. We assume that if we replicate those things, we'll get similar results. But those might be the bullet holes on the wings, things that person can afford to do because they've already survived. Their actual engine, the thing that kept them from crashing, might be their ability to build trust quickly or their tolerance for uncertainty in early-stage work, or a specific skill they developed before anyone was watching. If you spend your energy reinforcing the visible surface of someone else's success while leaving your own core skills underdeveloped, you're falling for what Liu Run calls a logical illusion. The question to ask isn't, what do successful people do? But what do successful people have that didn't show up in the story they tell about themselves? This brings us to one of the book's most practically useful ideas, and one of the most honest explanations of why talented, hard-working people can feel stuck. Most of us are taught that professional success comes down to two things: your ability, how good you are at your work, and your efficiency, how much you can produce in a given time. So we take courses to sharpen our skills, and we put in longer hours to get more done. Liu Run doesn't dismiss this. Ability and efficiency matter. But he points out that they share a critical constraint. They are both directly tied to your time. And time has a hard ceiling. There are only so many hours in a day, and at some point, no matter how skilled or fast you are, you simply can't add more output by working harder. That ceiling is where burnout tends to live. The missing ingredient is leverage. And leverage is what separates linear growth from exponential growth. Liu Run identifies three main forms. The first is team leverage, the ability to coordinate the efforts of other people toward a shared goal. This isn't just management in the bureaucratic sense. It's the capacity to multiply your impact by enabling others. The second is product leverage, creating something: a document, a process, a piece of code, a video that provides value repeatedly without requiring your presence each time. The third is capital leverage, using resources to scale an idea beyond what your personal effort could achieve. The important thing to understand about leverage is that it doesn't replace ability. It multiplies it. Someone with high ability and zero leverage works hard and produces in proportion to their hours. Someone with the same ability and meaningful leverage can produce impact that outlasts any individual workday. Most people in the early stages of a career are, reasonably, focused on building ability. That's right. But at some point, the growth question shifts. It stops being, how do I get better at this? And starts being, how do I make what I'm already good at work for me when I'm not in the room? That shift doesn't happen overnight. But it does start with noticing that you're spending 100% of your working energy on tasks, and zero on building anything that compounds. The workplace is a complex system, but it's not an unreadable one. Once you start seeing the logic beneath the surface, a few things become clearer. Conflicts look different when you stop asking only, who's right? And also ask, what's the fastest path to protecting my interests here? Sometimes the jurist's answer and the merchant's answer will be the same. Often, they won't be. The skill is holding both. Questions look different when you learn to separate the ask from the premise embedded in it, whether those questions are coming from a colleague in a meeting or from your own internal monologue at 11 p.m. Other people's success looks different when you stop trying to copy the visible surface and start asking what's underneath. What didn't make it into the highlight reel? And your own effort looks different when you stop measuring it purely in hours and output and start asking, where is the leverage? None of this requires you to become cold or transactional or to stop caring about fairness. Liu Run isn't arguing that how things should work doesn't matter. He's arguing that if you want to actually build something, a career, a team, a body of work you're proud of, the world will not wait for you to be right. It will not slow down so the system can be fair. The people moving forward aren't the ones who figured out how to complain better. They're the ones who learned to see clearly and acted on what they saw. That's the underlying logic. Not a set of tricks. Not a shortcut. a way of seeing. And here's how you start applying it today. First, separate the why from the premise. The next time a question in a meeting or an email makes you feel defensive, pause before you respond. Ask yourself, is what's being assumed here actually true? You don't have to challenge it publicly. Just don't let the premise slip in unchecked. Next, run the loss ownership question. When a conflict arises, ask, who suffers the most if this doesn't get solved? If the answer is you, that's not a reason to feel wronged. It's information about where your energy is best spent. Don't wait for the person who caused the problem to fix it if you have more at stake in the outcome. And finally, carve out 1 hour for leverage. Once a week, use 1 hour not to clear tasks, but to build something that will reduce future task load. Standardize a process. Document something others keep asking you. Teach a colleague something you currently do alone. 1 hour, once a week. It compounds faster than you'd expect. The workplace makes more sense once you can see the system underneath it. And once you can see it clearly, you stop being at the mercy of it and start being able to move through it with intention. This is 9 to 5 Book Club. See you at the top.